I'd like to proudly introduce Ms. Suzanne Fisher. She's the author of many best-selling novels, and tonight she's going to be talking about her newest one, A Season on the Wind, which story is set in Pennsylvania in the Amish country and talks about the National Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird count. So without further ado, welcome Suzanne Fisher.
Hi, everybody, and I want to thank you for carving time out of your busy holiday schedule for just a sort of a fun look at another slice of Americana that you might know a lot about or you might not, but I hope by the end of this you'll be intrigued to learn even more. And I think, Jeannie, we just wanted to mention if everyone can kind of make sure they're mute during the presentation, but save questions because when I finish up, I will turn it back and we can have some time for some Q&A. So I'm going to expand my screen. So does that look good to you? All good? So I am Suzanne. I am wanted to welcome you to the Amish and the Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird count. And you might be wondering, this always takes me a little while just to figure out their slide moving forward. What did the Amish have to do with the Christmas bird count? Well, that's a great question, and I'm actually going to get to that. But first, I'm going to give a little bit of background about the Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird count that I'll call the CBC from this point on. And this year, interestingly enough, marks the 122nd National Audubon Society's annual Christmas bird count this very year, which ironically was not first about counting live birds. So the actual traditional Christmas side hunt began, as you can see in this painting. It was about counting, it's painting a pile of dead animals. And this holiday tradition, the Christmas side hunt, used to encourage people to go out in the woods on Christmas Day, and they would choose two sides, and they'd team up, and then they would try to kill anything and everything in fur or feathers that crossed their paths. And the winner was the side, hence the traditional Christmas side hunt, with the largest pile of dead birds. In this time, this is, we're talking around 1900, the turn of the century, most people considered birds as just a limitless resource. As you can see from the little hats and the feathers on the hats, it was, they were used for all different kinds of things. And in fact, sensitive slider. In fact, the hunters actually supplied the fashion industry with so many snowy egret feathers that they had nearly wiped out the population in Northern America. And there was an estimated 5 million birds from 50 species killed every single year in the name of fashion. At this time, again, right around 1900, conservation was in its beginning stages, and observers and scientists were just beginning to be concerned about declining bird population. Well, enter a gentleman named Frank Chapman. And Frank Chapman was a noted ornithologist, a conservationist, and he was the writer and editor for a magazine called Bird Lore, L-O-R-E. And he was the officer in the then very young Audubon Society, which actually didn't get going until later in the next few years. But in 1900, Frank Chapman launched the first CBC, the first Christmas bird count, as an alternative to the traditional Christmas side hunt. And he invited all his readers to Bird Lore magazine that this year they should count birds instead of kill them. Well, thanks to his enthusiasm, 27 people participated in 25 counts that first year, and they counted 90 species of birds. So this tradition has now continued for 122 years. And as you can imagine, we are in 2021. 1 year is missing, and you can guess what year that was. That was last year. It had to be canceled because of the pandemic. But it is really carried on, and it's going on this year. And it has had such an impact that within about 18 years, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act of 1918 was one of the very first US's first wildlife protection laws. And this was a statute that made it illegal to hunt or take or capture or kill or sell even the eggs and the nests of 1,100 species of migratory birds. And the Audubon Society and the CBC played a role in the beginning of that and America's growing conservation movement. So every year now, the CBC takes place across the country. The purpose of the CBC is completely scientific. It's to assess the health of bird populations and to help then guide conservation action based on the data that comes in. Thousands of Christmas bird counts are happening in the US, all across the United States, all across Canada, Central and South America, the Caribbean, and even some Pacific islands. So here's how it works. Every CBC has an established 15-mile circular count area. So on a prearranged date, registered teams will go out and they'll go out with an assigned volunteer observer, someone who actually knows what they're doing, and they're going to count the number of birds of each species that they can identify in that 15-mile radius. And then every count has a volunteer compiler that sums up all the lists and inputs the total number of species into the Audubon Society's Christmas bird count database. And today, it is the longest running citizen science project in the wildlife survey in the entire world. And it's considered the gold standard of citizen science. Pretty impressive. And you do not have to be an experienced bird watcher. You don't have to know much about birds to join in on a CBC. You can be a complete novice. You just want to have the interest and you want to have a day available between, I believe the dates are always December 14th through January 5th. It takes place over a 3-week period. And you will only be doing this for one day. You don't have to commit anything more than that. But it's really a wonderful experience to do and learn a lot and make friends, and they, people of all skill levels are welcomed. So if you have any interest at all in joining a CBC this year, you can go to my website. I put a page up there that'll take you directly to the Audubon Society, or you can go to the audubonsociety.com and you can find out where you need to go to find out more information and how to join in. So that's the Audubon Society's Christmas bird count. Now let's get back to the Amish. What do the Amish have to do with the Christmas bird count? Which is a great question. First of all, just to give you a kind of a flyover view, the Amish are sharp birders. They are really, really good and well known for their birding instincts and knowledge and experience. And an inordinate amount of rare birds are sighted by the Amish. And I'm going to get to those reasons in a minute. But before I do, I want to give just a painless, really quick history lesson about the old order Amish, because there are so many misconceptions about them. So first of all, they are an offshoot of the Mennonites. And the Mennonites came first. That's a Protestant denomination that began in Europe in the early 1500s, led by a formerly Catholic priest named Menno Simons. And that's where you're getting the Mennonites. They grew out of Menno Simons and his beliefs and those who followed and believed along with him. So Menno Simons and others like him believed in adult baptism rather than infant baptism. And in our day and age, I know that sounds like such a small thing, but in the 1500s, boy, that was a deal breaker, both for the church and for the government as well. And I have a hunch it has something to do with taxes. But they were given the name Anabaptists, and they were heavily persecuted, chased across Europe. Their belongings, their homes their belongings were confiscated, their homes and property were confiscated. Many were martyred, burned at the stake, tortured, put in vats of boiling oil. I mean, terrible things. And that distrust of government is still a part of who they are, especially the old order Amish. And it's one of the reasons why they, for example, are not connected to the public utility grid, why they have their own schools, why they live separately. So back to just Menno Simons and his beliefs, and those somehow, despite the persecution, these small cells of Protestant believers continued to grow and grow and grow, these Anabaptists. And as they grew, they started splitting because of differences, which is no different than we are today. And you might recognize some of the names of the groups that splintered off of the original Mennonites. The Hutterites, they're in Northern America, Canada, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. They believe in everything in common. They share everything, almost like an Israeli kibbutz. The River Brethren, the Apostolics, the German Baptist, which were called Dunkards. And that was actually my grandfather. He was raised plain. He was an Anabaptist. And now we're going to fast forward. So all these groups are splintering off through the century, and now we're into the 1600s and continuing to grow, continuing to be persecuted, continuing to scatter. And now we're going to fast forward to 1693, where a Mennonite minister named Jacob Amen, he believed that the church did not go far enough with discipline. And he actually introduced the concept of shunning. And that became the Old Order Amish church. So only the Old Order Amish will shun when people leave the church after they've been baptized. Only the Amish. None of the other groups do that. And that's a really important distinction among the plain people. There's other things as well, but that's what started it. And that's where that is still true to this day. Now, today, there are no Old Order Amish in Europe at all, none. Many Mennonites all around the world and other groups, but not Old Order Amish. However, it might surprise you to learn that in North America, the Old Order Amish are the fastest growing population. They're not the largest, but they're the fastest growing. So Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio have the largest Amish populations in the US. And now I'm going to zero in. We're now up to present day. See, I told you that was painless. And we're going to look directly at a place called Holmes County, Ohio. And that's marked in red on the map there. And in Holmes County, there are an unusual amount of rare bird sightings on Amish farms. And some bird populations that are declining in a lot of other areas, like kestrels, are actually increasing in the vicinity of Amish farms. The Amish love birds, and the birds love the Amish. I'm going to show you a couple pictures I took when I was out. These are purple martin birdhouses, very common. You would rarely see an Amish farm without some purple martin birdhouses. They're almost like a little airport, the way the birds are coming in and going out and coming in and going out. They are fabulous mosquito eaters, which is why they're on Amish farms. So I'm going to show you a couple other pictures just to give you a sense as we zero in. This is an Amish schoolhouse, a one-room schoolhouse. And I've had the privilege of spending some days in different Amish schoolhouses in different states. And it is such a wonderful, rich experience. I just sit in the back and I observe and I don't say a word, but it is really a wonderful opportunity. I feel very privileged that I've had that. And I wanted to show you one of these schools. This is Goose Creek School. It has a bird feeder that the teacher, in fact, a male teacher at this school, has set up against the window for children to see and make it easy to feed. But it's just that much a part of the day in the life of a school children. So I'm going to show you a couple more pictures that just, oops, sorry, went too forward. There. This is called corn shocking. This was taken, I took this in Holmes County. It is a beautiful, beautiful sight to see shocked corn in the winter. And the Amish shock their corn stalks rather than just, chew them up in a grinder. And they overwinter, which provides just an excellent place for birds to rest and find food, probably little animals as well, during the winter time. So why the, oops, I'm so sorry about this. This is my fault. Okay, but why are there an inordinate amount of rare bird sightings on Amish farms? We're still getting to that. And these are some of the reasons. First of all, how are they noticed? And the horse and the buggy is the chief means of local transportation for Amish people. If you ever have a chance to be in an Amish buggy, I highly recommend you try it. That's actually me down in the bottom corner. They are such a unique feeling to be in this little box along a country road going so much slower than we normally go. The sounds are so different. The only thing that just becomes absolutely terrifying is when a truck rumbles by. But it's really such a neat experience. And that slower pace, then this is how they live. It's a slower pace. And because of that, they actually see and hear things that the rest of us just miss. We're in cars, we don't even think twice about it. We're just going from A to B. Okay, another reason that more rare bird sightings are found on Amish farms is that the farming traditions of the Amish haven't changed as radically as practices on commercial farms. So they use fewer pesticides and fewer insecticides. And that, of course, means there's going to be more insects on the fields, both beneficial and not so much, but they attract more birds. So here's another look just at the corn shocking and that picture way up close of how it looks. I think I might have mentioned, but it's kind of considered a lost art. So many Amish, again, we're answering the question, why do Amish sight more birds, more rare birds? And many Amish beginning at a really early age are enjoying birding. They study them, they observe them, they record them. It's kind of a hobby embraced by the Amish culture, and it's one that the whole family can and does participate in. I've been to places where you'll see a van load. They'll hire a driver and a van, and the van will come up to a place where, like a marsh area on a migration period, and out will come all these Amish, a family with little ones all the way to older ones. And they just are, the birds are, when they're migrating, they get to a certain place like marsh areas and they're exhausted. And you can get up in the springtime, especially, you can get up close to them and just observe them because they just are resting. And probably most of you know this, but just in case you don't, birds migrate at night and they rest and feed during the day. So you'll see this often in the springtime in the Amish areas. Another part of the birding culture for the Amish is that birding creates a lot of jobs for them. They will build birdhouses, bird feeders that they sell at roadside stands and local cottage industry and even some retail shops in the area. They also sell bird seed and binoculars and scopes and all the kind of accessories. But I'm still kind of dancing around this question, why Holmes County? What makes it so appealing to rare birds? Oh, I gotta back up. Okay, sorry. Okay, they feed birds. The Amish feed birds, the Amish watch birds, they record what they see, and they have all these trained eyes and ears alert during daily activities. They're outside, so they're seeing more. Unusual bird calls and sights kind of don't go unnoticed among the Amish. There's a saying that rare birders tend to find rare birds. And just to back up to the CBC, the Christmas bird count is not counting rare birds. It's counting just any and all birds they can find around it. So this is a little bit of a different topic with the Amish and their rare birds. But the Amish are really always quick to point out that it's not just their keen awareness that makes them, that is responsible for the frequent sightings of rarities. It's also the habitat they live in Holmes County. There's a rich variety of habitat. There's dense woodlots, there's brushy fence rows, there's croplands and streams and ponds, and all of those things create the kind of enticing environment for birds to come and to stay. And then now and then some of them are rare. And this is what I want to get to. There's a sighting, this little northern wheat ear, and it is a small bird. It was sighted on an Amish farm, and this is back in September of 2009. This little bird had been flown off course as it was making its way from the Arctic, where it summers, the Arctic, to the tip of Africa. It flies all that way during its fall migration period, and it winters down in Africa. So this little bird was blown off course, somehow ended up in Ohio of all places, but of course Ohio's one of the 4 flyways that are like highways in the sky for migrating birds. And it ended up on this wood pile of an Amishman, a man named Emery Yoder. And he was experienced enough to realize he had a rather unusual little bird sitting on his wood pile. So word soon spread over the rare bird alert, which is how the Amish would find out about this kind of things. And you can too. The Audubon Society has a rare bird alert, and on the telephone as well as on the internet. And over the next few days, hundreds of people came to see this little northern reindeer. It's almost like he hung around just to kind of put on a show for a while. And not all Amish farmers are as gracious as Emery Yoder. He even had a guest book for people to sign their names. People came Amish and non-Amish alike, but they all just had a love of birds, and they would kind of quietly line up and just walk past the wood pile to get a picture or just get a sighting of this little bird. And it's not at all unusual for the Amish to notice something like this because they're considered, like I mentioned, some of the sharpest birders in the state of Ohio. So another thing the Amish do is something called birder clubs. And they aren't generally people that join clubs. So this is sort of an interesting part of them. They've created young birders clubs in Ohio, and many young and adult Amish birders will join in and support it. And they Amish see this as kind of a positive way for children to start to learn about birds and to have an interest and to enjoy nature as well. And that brings me back to the popularity of the Christmas bird count among the Amish. And I have a friend named Cheryl Harner. Oops, I'm sorry. I did it again. I'm so bad at this. I have a friend named Cheryl Harner, who is the former president of the Ohio Audubon Society. And she would definitely add to this, saying that when it comes to the Christmas bird count, the women and the men, or the women and the girls of the Amish would not be participating in it. It would only be the men and the teenage boys. And that's just part of their culture. The women would not be participating with, strangers and all. But they wouldn't go birding by themselves. But one thing kind of fun is that the teenage boys in Ohio ride bicycles to bird. Unlike Lancaster, they ride scooters. Ohio, the Amish churches permit bicycles. And so the Amish teenagers will go in their 15-mile radius only on a bicycle, which is kind of fun to see and observe. Every Amish church is a standalone. So you can find all kinds of variation, but that's just one of the many variations that I find kind of intriguing. So before we go to a time of questions, I want to add just a funny story that happened recently in my own backyard with my own birding experience. And there, you might have peeked this already. So I have a kind of a big backyard, and we have redwood trees back there. And there is, for a couple of years now, this Western screech owl has been coming into the owl box that we have out there, and you can see her there. She's not as, she looks almost like a great horned owl, but she's about half the size, but they have the same horns like the great horned owl. So anyway, I noticed she was there, and that was great. And I was happy she was there. I love listening to their sounds at night and always feel kind of privileged when a bird is nesting on our property. Well, a week or two later, all of a sudden, I woke up one morning and I went out to feed the dogs out of our kitchen window or kitchen slider. And there was this little gray ball of fluff huddled close to the kitchen door. And I have to be honest, when I first saw it from afar, I thought it was maybe like a dead rat or something like that. It just had that kind of look to it. And then when I went up close, I realized it was a baby owl. And it was Mrs. Owl's baby owl. It had hopped all the way. It must have fallen out of the nest of the owl box and hopped through the night all the way around our back of our house to the door, a couple of right angles there, probably 50 to 70 feet. I'm just amazed it could do that because it was just so little, about the size of a softball. So for most of the day, I kept the dogs inside and my grandchildren away from the door. And I kept hoping that it would hop back to its nest or the mom would come. or some, you know, you're kind of told not to intervene in nature. But the longer the day went on, the more nervous I got. And so I finally called our local wildlife hospital, and they told me just what to do. So here's what we did. We called my son-in-law because he was a college pitcher college baseball pitcher, and has really long arms and isn't afraid of heights. And he came over with my little 2-year-old granddaughter, Annie, and he scooped the baby owl just so gently into the container. And we got to kind of look at it up close. And then my husband set up this huge ladder, and James climbed all the way up to it. And he kind of so gently just scooped the baby owl into the owl box. And it was so funny. He said he could hear just these, clunk, clunk, clunk noises, like something happening inside, like the mother's saying, "Where have you been all day?" That kind of a thing. But the Wildlife Museum had said just to kind of watch for the next 24 hours, because if the baby was out of the nest again, out of the owl box, it was probably being rejected by its mother. So it would have to come into the hospital. So I kept a close eye, watched a number of times a day, but all seemed well. Everything seemed like what a great end to a story, but the story wasn't over. So 1 week later, and I'm being really truthful here, just 1 week, a Saturday to a Saturday, we woke up another morning and there was this crash against our window. And it was the owl. It was the baby owl. It had, well, I don't know if it was maybe taking its inaugural flight or what, but it went straight into our bedroom window and hung on the screen there for probably 5-10 minutes, long enough for us to kind of figure out what has just happened. And I got some pictures, which I'm so glad I did. And then he took off, and we haven't seen mother or baby since. I hope they come back next year. Now, you might be thinking that maybe this owl wasn't the brightest, but I kind of like to think he was stopping by just to give thanks for saving him. So as I just conclude that, and that kind of brings me to just a love of birds that I ended up wrapping into a story called A Season on the Wind. And this is about another little rare bird, a white-winged tern, which again makes a very infrequent appearance in North America. But it has actually ended up in Pennsylvania before. It ends up on an Amish farm, and it just turns life upside down. And I have to be honest, there is an Amish teenager in this story named Micah Weaver, who is probably the best reason, I think, to read this book, because he works as a field guide for avid bird enthusiasts, Amish and non-Amish both. And in between each chapter, I have Micah's bird log, which is very similar to what you would find in any birder's log. Like the date, where they saw it, what the conditions were, observations, and then just notes. Well, I had so much fun doing this. So I probably did 20 some of these bird logs. And you see a lot of Micah's humor in these bird logs. And the thing that's interesting about Micah is that he has a speech impediment. So he does not talk very much, but he does listen well. And that's actually one of the first lessons of birding, is listening. So if you might like to find out more about A Season on the Wind and Christmas bird count, and especially Micah Weaver, I invite you to ask your librarian for a copy of The Season on the Wind, or go to my website. And if you want to stay in touch, I welcome you to. It's such a neat way to connect with people because of Zoom. I'm so thankful for it. And I have actually a free gift to download for you if you're interested. And of course, you can always go to your favorite retailer and get a copy too. But I thank you very much. And with this, I'm going to pass it back, and we have some time for questions if you have any. So I'm going to stop the share, and back we go. Okay, and you are up. There. There we go.
Okay, all right, that was wonderful presentation. Does anyone on the call have any questions for Ms. Fisher about her book or about the National Christmas Bird Count? Anyone? If so, please unmute yourself and feel free to ask.
And you can put it in the chat too if you want.
Yes.
I always feel like we need a couple of kind of primed questions just to get it started, because there, Zoom has an awkwardness a little bit too.
Yes.
But go ahead.
Yeah, one of our participants said, thank you for the excellent presentation. I loved the owl pictures. I do have a question. She needs to type it.
Okay, we're watching.
So hopefully she'll get that for us.
That's great. Oh, I'm glad to hear you like the owl, because I wasn't sure. That was a late addition into the presentation, and I just thought it was such a fun story. I ended up making a children's book for my family. And in fact, it just came today with all the pictures. I have more pictures than just that one, but just like a little story by Mimi, a true story by Mimi, but it's kind of fun.
While Amanda is typing the question in the chat, I had one. I've read a lot of your books. I'm a fan of your writing. And I'm from Ohio, and I've actually been to Holmes County when I used to live there. And it was just delightful. I've always been fascinated by the Amish. I don't know that would have the fortitude or the wherewithal to live that life, but I've always admired how they live their lives. But I wondered, you mentioned that you had a grandfather that was a member of the Plain people. And I just wondered, I assume, you've done a lot of research, and have you ever spent time on an Amish farm, or, how do you go about doing your research?
Well, I know it's a huge question, because it's and it's a big thing to answer, because I do have a family connection with the Plain people. My grandfather was raised German Baptist, or Dunkard is another word for it as well. And he grew up in Gettysburg, outside of Gettysburg, on a farm called Sleepy Hollow he was one of 11 children. And as I had mentioned before, only the Amish shun. So the German Baptists would not be shunning if someone chose to attend a different church or go to. Also, the Old Order Amish have the 8th grade education, sort of a cap at 8th grade, though they are lifelong learners. I have to really give them a lot of props, because they are some of the most intelligent, hardworking people, and they keep learning and learning and learning. But their formal education ends at 8th grade, unlike the Mennonites or the German Baptists or other groups. So my grandfather came to a point where he was an intellectual, and I think he was not all that keen about being a farmer. They were running out of farmland, which is a story that's, almost a story across America in certain overpopulated areas. And he ended up at Penn State and majored in agriculture economics, and then did farm reports for the first radio station in the United States. And he had a career at Saturday Evening Post. And then when he retired, he actually became the first publisher of Christianity Today, that magazine with Billy Graham. So anyway, my grandfather's life was very inspiring. And he also had a wonderful relationship with his many siblings and many, many nieces and nephews. So you can imagine the cousins and all that. Though he was Presbyterian, he did not, remain German Baptist. But my cousins are, and they live a plain life. They will drive in cars, and they will go on airplanes, but they would not have a computer or a radio or a television in their home. And with that comes a little bit of what you're mentioning, Judy, just a slower, calmer life. They are so sincere, so authentic, and I've always been drawn to it. So as I was starting to research more about the Old Order Amish, first of all, my cousins are a great resource. And then beyond that was a lot of really just digging. And I was going back. I did stay at Amish farms. I've been to different states. I went to Elizabethtown College, which has quite a few scholars there. I read and read and read. I knocked on cold doors, which was not an easy thing to do, but I think I've learned enough since about the Old Order Amish to get a sense of who might be willing to talk to you and who might not. And I've kept relationships up as well, which has been such a treat. In fact, as Christmas comes, I just love that I get Christmas cards from Old Order Amish people. It's just a thrill to have these friendships, people I would never have known had I not been writing about them as well. So that's kind of how to answer that question in a very long answer. It's a lot of work. I'm still on the outside looking in. So there's probably a lot about them that very, very few people ever convert to the Old Order Amish. I think it's really almost under 100 people. It's growing from the inside out. Not only is it a different language and a different life, but there is a mindset in being older Amish where the good takes precedence over the individual. And that is so different from basic Americans who believe so strongly in individualism. And I think that's where people might even try it and they just can't do it after a while. So it's an interesting life. I probably becoming a Mennonite when people who do leave the older Amish and not, you know, I'm hope I'm not rambling here too much, so interrupt me if I am, but there's a great variation among the older Amish from progressives to extremely conservative, you know, almost like anything, but within the older Amish, even horse and buggy Amish, you know, you have that much of a variation, but they still have a huge retention rate, you know, across the board. 85 to 90% of their young people are choosing to become baptized as an adult, which is really the point when they become Amish. You're born into an Amish family, you become Amish when you are baptized.
That's amazing. Thank you. And we did get that question in the chat. And it says, despite growing up in Indiana and once riding in an Amish buggy, I don't know a ton about the culture. Have any of the Amish people you have visited read your books? Do they enjoy how popular the books about the Amish have become, at least judging by our library shelves?
I know, especially during the pandemic. Have you found, Jeannie, that a lot of people have sought Amish fiction to read? A lot, I've heard that from a lot of different libraries. So do the Amish read Amish fiction? Do they like it? I know they do read. I know that for a fact, but they read a lot. Fiction would probably be not as common as other books. I have to say, I've never been in an Amish home without floor to ceiling bookshelves. They read and read and read. And a lot of authors you may recognize, Max Lucado and others, they love. Amish fiction would probably be something they would roll their eyes at. And I've gone all the way from people who read them and get a kick out of them and enjoy them and even find some complimentary, you know, as far as the authenticity, to an Amish bishop who looked at me and was almost like scowling at me. So, you know, I think there's across the board. You can't kind of fit them all in one box, but, you know, as far as do they read? Yes. Do they read Amish fiction? Probably not as much.
Okay. Anyone else have any? Oh, okay. Here's another one. It says, a lot of the Amish I have been around in Ohio speak German, I think, instead of English. Do you speak German with them? This has been a very interesting and educating session. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad. Great question. And it's what you're hearing is not German. It is a dialect of German, which is unique to the Rhine River, the valley area. It's a certain part of Germany that the Palatinate, it's called, that most of these people came out of. And that dialect, even among the Mennonites, among Lutherans, there's many people who use this German dialect. We know it as Pen Dutch. It's an interesting dialect. It's an oral tradition. It is not written down. It's a little bit like, sometimes I think I took German in high school and college. So I know German, not great at it, but I can recognize it and haltingly, you know, speak well with it. But it's almost like a circus mirror. You know, the dialect is that different. For example, I have a friend named Esther Smucker, but her name actually is Esther Snooker. So it's a little different way of using vowels, and words are different. And like I mentioned, it's an oral tradition. So you aren't sure, you know, what the spelling is exactly, but because of it's an oral tradition that has come from Europe, that has been amazingly well preserved so that people in Pennsylvania could understand people in Ohio today and continue to. The Proverbs are a big part of their language. And that's true of any oral tradition, even, you know, of course, even the Old Testament. Proverbs were a way of communicating values and culture and observations, and they're passed down from, you know, so much easier to remember a sing-songy phrase than it is, you know, just there's, you know, it's almost like poetry in a way. And so the traditions, the Penn Dutch proverbs are just vast, and they're fun, and they're kind of a peek into hundreds of years ago what was important to these people. And I love studying the proverbs. I have a daily proverb. If anyone's interested, again, you can go to my website and sign up for them. And it's easy to unsubscribe if you'd rather, find you don't enjoy them that much. But they are just a daily word of wisdom sent right to your e-box, and they're really, really fun. I mean, like some of my favorites are, my mom's favorite was every mother crow thinks her own crow is the blackest. And they just have little sayings like that. My grandfather's was children should be seen and not heard. but you probably recognize a lot of them, and then a lot of them are just a unique picture into farming communities.
I'm curious again too. Do most people in the Amish, I know they deal some with people in the English world, as that, because oftentimes they do business with them or, whatnot. And so do children growing up in Amish homes, I guess, do they learn the Pennsylvania Dutch as well as the English so that they can communicate with the outside world?
Another really good question. They grow up, their first language is Penn Dutch, spoken in the home. They get to school, and that's where they learn English. And they also learn German, or what they call High German. And much of the church service, the hymns and some of the prayers and all, would be also in High German. So the older Amish are actually trilingual and really quite remarkable. And there's a little bit of an accent in the English, you can hear it, but they're quite literate.
Yeah, because their schools go up to the 8th grade, correct?
Mm-hmm.
It's probably rare. And my guess is based on what I've read from Amish fiction. So, but my guess is that not many of them would go on to get like a GED or even a college education.
No.
Correct?
Yes. Yeah, they wouldn't. It would probably be frowned on. And I don't think it would be, a common thing to do. Now I do know of people who have left the older Amish to pursue higher education. And in that, they haven't chosen not to become baptized. So they're not shunned, because they'd only be shunned if they were baptized, if they were a full member of the church. But I think generally those people end up at churches that are what I would almost call Amish light. They'd be like a Mennonite church or something like that, where it still has much in common with what they grew up with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So does anyone else have any questions? I don't see any more in the chat. Okay. Well, Ms. Fisher, we just want to thank you. It's been such an honor to have you with us tonight. And do you have any parting comments you'd like to share with us?
I just want to thank librarians, because I have been on some of my book tours into really rural parts of the country. And the library is the only game in town, and it's amazing. It's given me such an appreciation for what a librarian and a good one like Eugenie can do for a community where you're providing, they call it the digital divide. They're helping older people with technology. You're helping kids with homework. You're just creating events like this. And I'm so thankful. I really appreciate what you do. I love that I've had a chance to just connect with everybody here in a way that I never would have without, making the effort. So thank you so much for saying yes and letting me come into your life tonight for just a little while.
Oh, well, thank you for kindly joining us. And we're kind of proud at Central Arkansas Library System, because we just found out that we won a nationwide award from the Klein Foundation, and it's $250,000. So it's going to go a long way towards helping us serve the patrons in our community here in Central Arkansas and Pulaski County and in Perry County. And there was an article written up about us in the Library Journal. Oh. So it was a really exciting thing for us. And the other little piece of good news that our system had was that our millage passed. So we who work for the system, we're all thrilled to know that we would have jobs for the foreseeable
Oh,
future.
good, good.
So, but a couple more people have chimed in the chat. They said, thank you. It was so interesting. Thank you. You provide our patrons with reads they enjoy, as proven by the fact that both of our copies of Season on the Wind were checked out when she tried to get one. And I know I'm going to be taking my copy. I just read it. I couldn't put it down. I loved it. And I'm also going to contribute it to our collection because I would like other people to have the opportunity to enjoy the book. And if I want to check it out and visit with that book again, I know where to get it. So, but thank you again. I'm going to stop our recording.
Okay. Thanks.